It's pretty good. I mean, it might be like...
Okay. So our first question is, have you experienced any racial discrimination or bias after moving there?
Maybe you guys can you just give me a little background on what this project is about? Like what class it's for, what the overall...
yeah. Okay, so it's for geography, and so here, maybe go to our driving question. So we're trying to, so she like split us up into groups, and we're just kind of like going into like the background of like the history of Africa. And so our question is, how can we work to combat the racist perceptions of modern day Africa? And so we had to break it down into like these just like these smaller questions, and then we had to like get like a primary source, and then we'd get artifacts, and then we had to just get a bunch of information. So
And like we're trying to kind of like prove like how Africa isn't all like poverty and everything. Like there's also like nicer universities and stuff.
there's more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you guys know that I am not African, and
Yes.
I am... So, you want me to speak from my experience here as like an American living here who like lives in Africa, and like my idea of like what Africa is like, or to sort of like speak what I see around me, or what exactly?
Kind of how like you're not living, how there's kind of more to it than living like in poverty, and you living there, like how you were living, I guess.
Well, just, I mean, like, I obviously don't live a representative lifestyle of the average Cameroonian.
Yeah. So I guess it'd just be your average lifestyle that we would want.
What I'm saying is, like, I'm here, and I am, you know, in America, I'm very middle class, but here I'm probably much more upper class. So if I describe to you how I live here, it's not going to be representative of like how the average Cameroonian lives. I can give you an example or an idea of how the average Cameroonian lives from my perspective. Of course, I'm not like a original source, but if I describe to you how I live, it's like you necessarily extrapolate that to the rest of the area.
Yeah.
Okay.
How should we do it then? Should we say like to her, like to how an American like might live, or should we do like the average?
Probably the average.
Okay.
Okay, so then let's
Tell you what our questions.
yeah.
So the alternative, I'm happy to answer your questions. I can answer like me myself, like have I experienced any racial issues here as an American in Cameroon? I can also hand you over to my nanny who is here, who is a Cameroonian, who can answer on behalf of herself, or I can sort of guess what I think an average Cameroonian would say.
So probably it would be good just to hear from you. I mean, it'd probably be good to hear from. Probably just you answer the questions, and then I don't know. Do you want to hear from Nanny?
I don't care. Maybe we just like have her answer the questions and like kind of see like her perspective of like being an American there and like how she sees it like through like an average Cameroonian, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just go through the questions first, I guess.
Okay. So the first one is like, have you experienced or like noticed any racial discrimination or bias after moving there? Like towards like if you like say you're living in Africa, then people like, do they think that you're living in poverty? Or like, do they think like automatically think negative?
Oh, you mean, so you're saying not that I've experienced any discrimination from here, people Cameroonians, you're saying back in America, what do people think about it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think in general, I've lived a lot of my adult life in Africa, and I think in general, my family and Natalie's family, and a lot of people just think that you're like sacrificing so much, and like there's tarantulas everywhere, and it's incredibly dangerous, and they think you're really suffering, and to some extent, that's sometimes true. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that are very, there's a lot of luxuries that you don't have here.
Right.
But in life is much easier. And it's a lot more, to me, interesting. So yeah, in general, I think people do I think the average American has a very incorrect perspective of Africa.
Okay.
Okay.
You can just ask the next question.
Okay, do you notice any discrimination happening around you and like where you live?
Like, not in, like, where you are situated now, as opposed to, like, back in America.
You mean, do I personally experience it, or do I see other people experiencing
Either
it?
way.
Either way, do you notice any, or is any, I don't know how to say it, like, thrown upon you?
So, yeah, I'm an American here, and it's very obvious when you look at me that I'm not from here. And so I think in general, people think that if you're a foreigner, you're very rich and you're well-to-do, and to some extent, that's actually pretty true. So, like when I buy things or when I negotiate things, I know that people are trying to, they're either working a lot harder than they would be if I wasn't a foreigner to, like, make a better deal. But otherwise, West Africans are pretty accepting of foreigners. It's different in different parts of Africa because they have a different colonial experience. For instance, in Southern Africa, I think there's a lot more discrimination, a lot more anger against foreigners. But in West Africa, not quite as much. But within lots of parts of Africa, people, to some extent, there's a certain amount of tribalism, and people identify a lot with the ethnic group that they come from and the cultural they come from. So, for instance, here in Cameroon, I live right now, there's actually kind of a brewing conflict. Not civil war, but it's sort of like getting there, where there's two different ethnic groups, and they're sort of split based on whether they speak French or they speak English, and they fight and hate each other to some extent. So, what I experience here is pretty minimal, but it does exist, and it's not just foreigners who experience it. I think different people from different ethnic groups experience it as well.
Okay. Okay. Is there a large population of people living like you, like in better conditions, or like foreigners that have like kind of more money than most people there?
Yeah, most people who are expatriates here, who are foreigners, their government or their organization like provides them with like nice housing, and takes care of a lot of their utilities and so forth. There are a lot of so most foreigners are pretty well to do, but I'd say it's a pretty small, very, very small proportion of this 20 million people that live in Cameroon. There's a pretty small proportion that live here in the capital or in the Douala, which is sort of another really large city. There are definitely like rich Cameroonians too, but how we live is not representative at all of how the average Cameroonian lives. I have a nice 2-story house. I have air conditioning. I have Wi-Fi. I have, my house is quite nice. I have furniture and art. But the average Cameroonian lives in a house that has like a tin roof, might have a dirt floor, much more simple conditions.
This one, were you welcomed when you first moved there?
Sorry, what was that? Was I what?
Were you welcomed when you first moved there?
Yeah, very much so. Most Africans are incredibly warm and open and very welcoming.
Good to hear that.
How is the value of money different there than it is here? Like, say, like, how, like, you, like, living in a bigger house there is, like, different than, like, living in an average-sized house here?
You mean, like, how far does my money go comparatively to the States?
Yeah, well, kind of like how you were talking about how, like, you're more middle class in the States, but then as you came there, like, you kind of had more money. Like, you, like, seemed to, like, have...
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, exactly that. Like, in America, very much middle class, but here there's not as much of a, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I hit something. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
Yeah, so your money just goes a lot further. So, for instance, in America, I have 2 little kids, and I spent a lot of money. I lived in D.C., so the cost of living is a lot more there, but I spent almost a large portion of my salary on childcare. Here, it's much, much cheaper. Labor is much cheaper, so I can save a lot more money. But some things are a lot more expensive, like imported food. Like if I want to buy cheese or like a box of cereal, it costs like $12. So you have to just be careful. Just have to choose how you spend your money. You can buy lots of mangoes, but you can't buy like anything that's imported. I can have someone watch my kids for a lot cheaper, but gas is a lot more expensive. So you have to sort of just be careful about how you spend your money and sort of adjust.
Okay. And what made you decide to move your family there?
My husband works for the Department of State, and he was posted to the embassy here. And I do work in international development. So I'm able to just relocate and work here also.
Okay.
Had you been there before you decided to move?
I've Cameroon before. I've been to some other countries in the region, but never to Cameroon.
Right. So, did those places that you'd been to before leave a good impression? Like,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. When I finished college, I went to Niger and I did the Peace Corps, and I loved it. I hated it at the same time, but it was really, really hard. But I found it really. I don't know. I like living overseas. I think it's really exciting. I think I like the challenge of trying to learn about different cultures, people, how people interpret things differently. I like the challenge of working in a different language. I think I don't like it when people when they talk about Africa and they just say Africa like it's one big blob. It's not. It's incredibly diverse. Mm-hmm. And there's 30 countries here, and there's hundreds of different languages and thousands of different cultures. So it's very diverse. It's not like one just unit. But in general, every place I've ever lived and worked in Africa, and I think I've been to maybe like 20-some countries, I've had almost uniformly a very good experience. People are very welcoming. And it's just interesting. I like the culture a lot. I like how community is really important. Values are somewhat similar but different in some ways. So I enjoy it. So I've had a really good impression everywhere I've been. That's not to say there are issues. There are definitely challenges and problems, just like every place has them. So I don't mean to make it sound like really romantic, like it's just like it's a movie, like it's Lion King or anything. But overall, I have a very positive impression of it.
Should we just do that one, or should we do the bottom one? Because we kind of she kind of already talked about this.
Yeah.
Should we do the bottom one then?
Yeah.
What do you think causes people to view Africa as so poorly?
People, you mean Americans?
Yeah.
Just
Or
like national
people,
view or global view.
I think it's because almost exclusively the exposure they get to Africa is through like commercials on their television that show them starving children with bugs in their eyes who look really sad and pathetic, and you're supposed to give money to the famine. Or, there's this idea that like everybody is ravaged by AIDS and dying, that there's no stopping it, that people just live in like mud huts and they wear grass skirts and, drum all the time. There's a little truth in all those things. Like there are a lot of health issues. AIDS is an issue. People do live in mud huts in some places. But I think that's really all that Americans get exposed to. They don't get exposed to like the thriving businesses, the diverse and rich cultures. They don't get exposed to the complexity of the different socioeconomic realities here. So I think that they have a very, very skewed impression of what Africa is really like. I don't think it's the bits that they are exposed to do exist, but it's a small portion of what the reality is.
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay. I think that is